Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noobs podcast. You found us. My name is Matt Allen, and here's my accomplice, Joe. We're here to be with you along in your adventure to RC Airborne Proficiency.
RC.
That's right, RC.
RC.
It's the best way to go. I'm going to give it one more go. If it works, it works. Otherwise, use the RC, and then we'll work with it. And keep in the rezzing after that. Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noobs podcast. You found us. My name is Matt.
And I'm Joe.
We're here to be with you along in your adventure to RC Airborne Proficiency. So buckle in, let's take off. All right. So now that we're here together, and it's time period is between Christmas of 2019 and New Year's of 2019. We have had a little bit of time here to kind of do a bunch of stuff on our own, spend a lot of time with family and friends, and get all caught up in the different holidays between November, so between Thanksgiving and Christmas and the coming New Year. But we've both been busy getting involved in this hobby. I've been involved for a couple of years, and Joe just started. And that's part of what this episode is about. It's about talking to Joe and seeing what his journey has been so far. Because the point of this is to help each of you in your journey through the RC hobby, the aviation hobby here. I started. It was a mess. I was hoping to maybe just talking about it and kind of understanding little aspects better and hearing the kinds of stuff that we go through and some of our guests go through. Maybe you can kind of learn something and maybe avoid the pitfalls or listen to it and go, well, I didn't listen, but at least I knew better. And kind of know that, this happens, I'm not alone. So let me talk about what I've been doing. I'm heavily involved with Flight Test. It was one of my avenues of getting into the RC aviation hobby. They are a YouTube channel as well as a store, and their whole purpose is to use the RC airplane hobby to bring people together. And they wanted to use that and make it affordable, so that almost anybody can get back into it. Because what they were noticing is that it seemed like the only people who were flying RC planes and stuff were old curmudgeon guys, I guess kind of like myself, who had money, but, were just old, and there's no new kids. And, when he kind of, I guess, asked a bunch of his friends, why don't you do this? Why isn't this awesome? Everybody replied, well, of course, but it's just too expensive and it's too hard. And so he said, well, I think I can change that, because the guy who started it, Josh Bixler, you'll hear me mention his name just when talking about things. He basically said, man, I've been doing this since I was a kid, so I know the pitfalls. I mean, some of it I've forgotten, but I remember what it was like. I think I know a way to get people in. So he said, let me use common materials, the stuff you can get at the Dollar Tree or at the Walmart, and let me show you how you can take this stuff and get into the air and just have fun. And it's cheap, so if you blow it and you crash into the ground, because you will, it's okay. It's only a couple bucks. It's a little bit of time, but you learned a lot, and you laughed, hopefully, a lot. And by their example, I mean, you see their videos don't cut out the goof ups that they have, at least not much of them. So you see them try stuff and crash it, and fix it and crash it and fix it again and try it one last time, and maybe they get in the air and maybe they only have moderate success. But the whole time they're having a blast. So, and that's kind of the message I took away from them, is that this hobby should be fun. It's really frustrating. It's a lot of time and energy and effort and thinking things up and figuring them out and putting them together. And you're going, come on, baby. But you're literally launching things into the air. They're light and fragile. So they're going to come back to the earth one way or the other. If it's fast, they're not going to make it. And that can be pretty frustrating when you spend some time putting it together. So what I've been involved with is the flight test community. So there's a bunch of people who really kind of embrace this idea. And what they do is every so often they'll put a challenge out there saying, hey, this year it was go grab a balsa kit plan set and see if you can turn it into a foam board plan set. So make your plane out of Dollar Tree foam board so that people can use the plans that are existing and say that it's okay. You can make them out of foam board too. And so I've kind of raised my hand and put my hat in the ring for an awful lot of planes. I'm not going to talk about it, except it's over 6. And I think it's still under a dozen.
And
But
how
not,
many of you?
but not much. About 3, I think.
Oh.
Well, about 3, but there's about another 4 that are about 7, 80%. Some of them are done, and I just haven't thrown them in the air yet. Some of them are really close. I just haven't rebuilt something that smashed when it landed. And there's about 4 or 5 projects, which are really projects have like really close to done already. I just need about maybe an hour or 3 to finish up the last couple steps and see if it works. And most of those are still in that state, so I haven't even started tackling those, partly because they've been there a while and they're not new and exciting like some of the other projects. Like a Burgess Dunn flying wing. It's a 1914 bi-wing tailless flyer. So it has no tail. It's almost like a bomber, the B-2 bomber, but from 1914, way back when the Wright brothers were still selling airplanes to the military. And these guys created one of the first amphibious things. They brought it to the Canadian military. Long story short, I took this relatively simple plan, made it out of foam board. It seemed like a perfect fit. And I got it flying in the air, a couple crashes, a couple attempts that didn't work so good. But I, kept at it and I found the right way to get it going and off it went. And so I've been kind of flying that as proof of concept success that some of these other ones that are a little bit more challenging, if I just keep at it, I'll be able to make it. I'll get them flying too. And in the meantime, I also have like some store-bought gliders, some other homemade crafts that I know fly really well. So I bring those out on occasion just to kind of get a taste of aviation fun. And then I kind of put them away because I have these other projects I really want to finish up. So I've been working on those for the last like forever, but probably about like 2-3 months.
Okay. So just for a moment of clarification, when earlier you said you were heavily involved with flight tests, by that you don't mean you work with flight tests. You've followed their materials, you follow their channel, you've been in their forums, you've used their power packs, all that.
Exactly. I use their kind of methodologies and all of the information they've been releasing information for about the past 6 years. Every one of their designs, they release the plans for free, and I have access to a full-size plotter, so that makes it really easy to print them and try them. And they also have a build video for every single one of their builds. So they run through step by step exactly how to build their plane. They also have like an example video to kind of show you like how awesome their plane is, right? Like that it flies well. They're having a blast playing around with it, like you can too. So between those 3, it makes their craft really approachable. And no, I don't work for them. I don't know them. I've met them all about a handful of times at their big festival called Flight Fest, but I really am involved with the forum. So it's basically all the people who are like me who've kind of embraced this idea. We all kind of egg each other on to do interesting projects, or even if it's just taking an existing flight test build or a kit that they sell and building it. We're all kind of just supporting and encouraging each other towards success.
Right.
Sorry, that's probably the long-winded version of it, but anyway.
Just a little.
Now, I guess I'm hoping that what everybody hears through this is maybe the excitement that I have for the hobby, excitement I have, and enthusiasm I have for the methods that were kind of presented. Because to me, like without that, I never would have gotten into this hobby. I mean, straight out, I might have gone to the hobby shop about 100 times and I never would have picked up a plane because I look at the price tag of $400 or $300 and I need a transmitter for 200. Oh geez. Now I need batteries. Each one of them is 30. Oh, forget this. This is terrible. I can't do this. I'm
Right.
not going to put $600 into something I don't know will work and I don't know that I'll enjoy. So, these guys said, "Hey, you got about $100. Give it a go, man. Here's how." And
Right.
so I went in from there, and I think I described it a little bit earlier about that, but that's really what sold me. And I've consequently spent way more than that $400 towards this hobby, but I've had an incredible blast and an incredible learning journey along the way.
Hmm.
Now I know that ever since we got together and I started doing this, you kept looking over at what I was doing because I'd have a plane out here or a rack of planes by the next year or so.
Yeah.
And you're like, what the heck is going on, man? What you really like this stuff? And I'm like, this is awesome. And so I think I invited you the one time you were over to come out with me to the field because you were interested. You said that you had had some experience. And so I gave you this little tiny wing. They call it the mini arrow from flight test.
Wasn't the
And
Delta didn't have the semi-vertical stabilizers on it?
right.
It
Well,
was just
it was just a flying wing. I'm pretty
okay.
sure. And then we kind of gave it a chuck into the air, and I don't know if the battery shifted or something happened. I think it went okay, and maybe you were kind of startled at how it went, and you maybe dumb thumbed it, or either way, you didn't react. I guess quite in time. And unfortunately, we lost the nut that held on the propeller because I was using the wrong direction of stuff. Anyway, we'll get into that later. But because I lost the nut, I couldn't keep the prop solid on the plane, and we had to end for the day. It was like a matter of 5 seconds. You had the plane, and I was like, oh, and the plane, the craft was fine. After the crash, everything was good except I couldn't tighten down the prop on the motor. So
I think that
we
really
were
was the only issue with it because at that
that
time
was
that
it.
plane you weren't running a the power pod build on that. You actually had it the engine either mounted just inside the wing or just on the outside surface of it.
It
Uh,
actually was a power pod, but it was shoved in that pretty good, so it wasn't going anywhere.
I mean,
Um,
it's been 2 years
yeah,
since I
it's been a while since then.
tried to fly that one.
Yeah. Anyway, so you had this like tiny taste. You saw me fly the Vigan, that little ducted fan, but I think we were out of batteries by the time I had the chance to show you. I was ready to give you the controls for that one because that one flies great too. And then it was just like, oh shoot, that didn't work. So I pulled out the wing, and we just had a mishap. And these things happen, but I was sad because I was really excited for you to give it a try. And then
That's right.
about it,
'Cause
go ahead.
what wasn't that the? It was the first time that you and I had gone out, but you were trying to get uh whatever model plane you just called it. It was it had one of those inside uh motors. Anyway, it
The,
had its own thing that sits inside. It's more of a tunnel engine as opposed to an outside engine. And I remember we were having a hard time getting that one up into the air, which, like you said, could have been a battery issue.
yeah, and I think that's what ended up being what was going on for the day. Uh, I'm pretty sure. Pardon me. So it's an electric ducted fan. So basically, it's a regular motor setup with a couple extra blades, and they have a shroud around the blade tips of the prop, basically, and that creates incredible extra efficiency, I guess, uh, as far as airflow is concerned. But it's not the most efficient actual thrust to energy ratio. But either way, they sound really awesome, and they're embedded in the plane, so you can make jets, which is what people really like them for. Because otherwise, you have to put a prop on the outside, on the back, and you hear this noise and not a cool whoosh noise as it goes past. So,
Plus, like me, I'd be like, if I could get into that at some point, like, hey, I don't have to worry about busting a prop like I did recently.
you're right, and that's all part. And it's funny because that's all part of the hobby. But if you had no idea and you just went and bought a like $8 prop or something, and you just threw your plane in the air, hoping it would fly, it didn't fly, it crashed on the ground, and the first thing to go, almost always, the first thing it's going to give, and it's probably for the better because they're usually the cheaper component, is your propeller will crack or break or whatever, and
Bend.
or bend, and you're sunk. And you're like, what the heck? That's $8. It just flushed down the toilet. This sucks. This hobby's the worst, But if you know that that's part of it, you go and buy some relatively cheap propellers at first.
Right.
So that
Of
way,
course,
what? Go ahead.
there are ways to protect your props, which we can talk about in the future, prop savers and all that, which I've
Yep.
not. But that I think that can be a good conversation for future when you and I can really discuss different methods of protecting the prop because
Yeah.
I've only got a few more in my stuff before. Yeah, I gotta be looking at other options.
Right. Right. And there are options, which is pretty neat. So like you said, we'll get into that in an later episode. But what I wanted to talk to you about was how in the world did I finally get you to get sucked into this? And I say sucked into it, but you went willing.
Oh yeah. Um, it was a longer than I wanted it to be drawn out process, or a more drawn out process than I wanted it to be, largely because yeah, I met you because you're a friend of my wife. Met you when we were dating, when she and I were dating, and then we've had a friendship since then.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, in as much as this is a relatively inexpensive hobby to get into, there is still a bit of an upfront cost.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One that just until recently I could not justify uh, putting out the money for. There were more important things that needed to be taken care of. We had to get ourselves situated and set up. Um, and so, in the case of my wife and I, when the time came and you had messaged me that, hey, Joe, I found this kit on the, I think it was Flight Test Forums. You found it
Mm-hmm.
through where a guy was basically selling everything you needed to get started.
Right.
Everything
He
and
says, I have way too many other hobbies. I'm never going to get to this one. If somebody's interested in getting started, I got everything.
which, to be fair, the guy had gotten into the hobby at least a little bit because there were open parts I could see. There were parts that had been used, some servos that had been cracked open and worked on. So, but so
I,
you
I think
messaged me.
he I think he built
Of,
one plane and it didn't work the way he hoped. And he's like, I don't have time for this. And so he sold it, you know? But I mean,
yeah,
that's almost getting it brand new.
I mean, yeah, largely. There's really been. I think no, you had a servo that wasn't working. I think all my stuff's been working so far.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't had a chance to go through everything in the box, hook it up and test it. I'm kind of testing it and make sure it works as I need it. But um, anyway, you had messaged me and said, "Hey Joe, I got this. There was this guy selling stuff. It was a great steal, really. So I got it. And if you want the kit, I think you said like 150. You'd picked it up for, and it had the. Was that the right price?
It was
About
110, I think.
110. Okay. And it had the Ernigy 9X transmitter, multiple receivers. They had 3 receivers in the kit. The battery chargers, the batteries. There's
You had two
3.
batteries, right? It had a motor, a bunch of props.
The wheels. It had servos out the butt, man. He
I
had
think he
so
had
many.
about 10 to 12 servos, which is enough for about 3 planes, depending on how you use them. It could be three
Yeah,
to
like,
four planes.
like the guy had bought into it pretty good. Just it didn't. I guess it
Y-
didn't work
y-
out for him. So you'd said that. I was like, oh man, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to do that. Like, you may have to sit on that for a minute. Um, and your intent was either I'd buy it from you, or you'd have it for your son, or you'd find somebody else. And um, as it turns
Exactly.
out, I think Rachel thought that I might have forgotten about it. Because weekend to play D&D, and right as we were heading out, I was like, "Hey, babe, remember Matt's got that kit? Like, we said I could do it, right? We got to swing by the bank." And she said, "Yeah, go ahead." And we got up there, and she ran in before me. I was getting stuff out of the car. She's like, just whatever you got to do. So you may sound like somebody else had got it, but she had bought it for me. And then on my birthday, she gave me the full kit.
Yep.
Um,
I had to sit on
and
that
that
for a whole month.
well,
Till
well, she didn't realize the transmitter was in the box either. She thought it was just the receiver and all the parts. She thought we still had to get a controller.
right.
Otherwise, she needed it. She wouldn't have done that. She didn't realize the remote was or the controller was in there. But and the interesting thing about hobbies in general, and then just this situation for me was that was kind of that was a special moment. Being able to get into the hobby just between my wife and I, because you know, yeah, I'd been watching you do this for so long. You had tried to let me fly your planes a couple times.
I really did.
Technical issues, the nut
Yep.
flew off, or you crashed it before I got to fly it,
Sorry
and
about
or
that one. I really feel terrible about that one. I'd been flying one of the soaring craft, one of the gliders that I'd built, and as I'm kind of doing a maneuver, the wing folds and the whole thing just comes to the ground. I'm like, oh,
oh yeah, like 400 or 500 feet up in the air. We're watching, say, also just like whoop, and it just nose down. We're like, oh no.
oh.
And then
Joe,
I
I
think
don't think you're gonna be able to fly this one.
so. You grab Tony the Tiger glide, and you're like, let's get this one over. Let me just handle it and get it. Make sure it's flying right. Okay, woo, this is fun. Yeah. Okay. All of a sudden, whoop, there goes the engine pulling off for
Oh my
whatever
god, yeah, yeah, yep.
it. Uh, get
The glue didn't hold. It ended up melting or shearing off or whatever it was, and the firewall was just flopping around by the wires.
me. Me trying to fly yours, you trying to let me fly yours was not a thing that just was going to happen. But I maintain interest because I've always loved flight. And as we talked about in our intro episode, I've done the flight sims, I've done the air combat games, I've done space flight sims. So I've even taken a Cessna and I think a Sandpiper up actually the actual Cessna and the actual something
Hmm.
like a Sandpiper. I got a chance to fly those around once or twice. So I've had some flight time and I've wanted to get into it. So when I was able to, it was fun. I was really grateful. Um, and yeah, basically as soon as I got that kit home,
Oh
I
my god.
unboxed it, looked around, but work was in the way, so it was about a week or so before I could really crack it open and get into building my first plane.
Right. And as a little help for you, I printed out a couple kits. So one of the simple kits, simple to put together. I think it's like basically a plank plane. It's a motor, high alpha motor with a delta setup. And then I think I tried to give you a glider plane, but for some reason that didn't print out right that day. It was a hot mess. Anyway, and then I think I gave you a discus launch glider and then something else. And so you had like three planes to take home, and you kind of I think it was an FT, an old fogey, which is basically like a mid wing, easy gliding, under cambered. No, it's a high wing, under cambered, gentle flyer. I figured
Right.
as a starter plane because I really I I had no idea exactly how confident you were with sims at the time. I you said you'd simmed a lot, and I had no idea, right? So
Right.
I give you these plans. They're set up for beginners as best I could.
Mhm. And there, I mean, there's no way to know. until somebody, especially with our track record of me trying to fly your plane, um, putting it in the dirt just a few seconds after grabbing the
Uh,
controls. But,
and I know that that's one of those things that like that can happen to anybody.
oh yeah,
Getting it off the ground is the hardest part. Once it's in the air and up a little bit, you're like, okay, we're all good now.
yeah, and I'm still in that boat. What few flights I've been able to do, where I'm still staying. I don't have a huge open place I've located yet to fly, so I'm kind of having to keep the craft close to me, and I'm
Hmm.
not getting up in the air because I don't want to get it way up in the air and lose control of it or lose direction. Like which way am I flying? It go off
Yep.
somewhere. I'm kind of keeping it lower to the ground, 40, 50 feet, which is its own struggle
Oh,
because
that's so hard. You
if it
the
starts,
right.
but so I started with your plans. I looked through them and the old fogey looked like one. I was like, oh man, that'd be fun to put together and fly because again, I've flown Cessna, um, and they are stable craft. But looking at the parts list and what it was, I was like, oh man, I really want to kind of crank one out quick so I can. Largely, I want to crank out a plane quick so I can tackle my own design. Um,
I didn't
and
know
so I,
that at all.
yeah, you didn't. You're just like, come on, Joe, you need to start with the old fogey. I'm like, I'm going with the Delta there, bro.
Yeah. Now,
And
do you remember why I suggested the old fogey?
I think you were really leaning on it. The landing gear, the over cambered, the high wing, because it would just auto stabilize itself. It was just going to be a
Mhm.
good beginner plane.
It would, and the other half is I had one, and I was interested in building it with you, so that maybe we could meet up on like this break and kind of fly them together in the formation or some nonsense.
Right.
That was my
Well,
secret ulterior motive there.
my trigger happy self said, "Nah, I'm going to do the FT Delta," and yeah,
So,
the
so you built
Delta,
that pretty quick too.
yeah, the Delta was not a hard build. Honestly, I spent probably more time than was necessary trying to figure out how I was actually going to cut the parts out. Uh, because I've done some leather working, and with leather working, I take a ballpoint stylus and trace the design onto the leather,
Hmm.
then you know do what I want to do from there. The problem is with the leatherworking I've done, I've not needed perfectly straight edges, and I can kind of get away with that. But with this, like, the tolerances, they're not super tight, but they got to be there.
Yeah, they
Um,
have to be even, and the straighter the better on some of the pieces, and yeah,
right, and that's where you had said, just tape it to the board and cut it out. Like, I don't want to do that, but I ended up doing it and figuring out a way that I could tape it to the paper and not destroy the template in one use. So got the delta cut out and glued up and put together in time to take up to fly with you that weekend. We did D&D.
right.
Um,
And by Sunday, I think Saturday was okay. By Sunday, what had happened?
well, Saturday
How
it
was the weather on Sunday?
was windy. I was thinking Saturday it was still windy, but
I
we were
think it
hoping that
was, but it wasn't so bad.
I don't remember. I know that it was too windy when we went out Sunday and we said screw it, we're flying. And yours got in the air. You managed to fight the wind a good bit. I got mine into the air a couple of times, but I just wasn't fully committing to the to throttling up and getting going. And just because because it was also gusty. Like there was a steady wind, but then
Yeah,
you'd catch a gust, and
and it would kind
that'll
of turn your plane a funny way. And if you're not ready for it, which you're new to this whole hobby, not that you're new to controlling an airplane, but you're new to how this whole thing works. And yeah, a quick adjustment will put you down in the dirt real quick.
right. Which and this, I guess I can talk about it now. I don't know your full feelings on it, but within my Turnigy controller, I was able to go in and actually set reduced controls. And so for that day, I actually had the controls set up on a reduced sensitivity. I
So,
dial them back. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you when you're done telling us a little bit about it, go into a little bit more detail. If you're a beginner, what did you do and why did you do it? So go ahead.
Okay. Well, so with the Turnigy, there are uh, switches all over the daggone place. But of those, I was able to program a couple, which I had to look up how to do it, but I was able to program a couple to uh, basically put restrictions on how much throttle or how I won't say throttle. Well, maybe
How much deflection?
elevator, how much throw the various control surfaces
Exactly.
had, and I was able to dial them back to and had them set in the mode that when all switches are in the correct position, which I found out the hard way that if you don't have a switch in the right spot, your controller's going to boot up. It'll just sit there and say switch error, which will throw you
Oh
into a
no.
panic. But once my controller turns on, it connects. Like all my controls are automatically reduced down such that I can throw it, I can get up in the air, I can get a feel for the plane. It's kind of like my learning mode. And once I feel a little more comfortable, which I've not had the opportunity to switch out of these modes yet,
Mm-hmm.
um, but when I do feel more comfortable with the plane, I'll be able to throw two switches, one for aileron and one for elevator control, which this is running ailerators, elevators. That's not right. What's that? What's the
It,
term of that where your
they're
ailerons
probably flaperons,
flaperons?
which is basically where you can give them flap-like tendencies, so they'll give additional lift and slow the plane down, but they can still tilt opposite each other to give you roll control.
Hmm. So with those set up, I was still able to do the reduced control. So once I'm up in the air and I'm comfortable with the plane and I've got the feel for it, I can throw two switches and my controls open on up. The sticks still have the same distance that they can travel. Just by throwing the switch, the sticks become more sensitive on the control surface, and I get the full range of motion.
Hmm. I think because you were doing the Delta, that's the mix where it's elevator and aileron together because
Mm-hmm.
it only has two surfaces at the back of the plane. So you can use them like elevators to basically control your pitch, and then you can control your yaw by alternating them. Instead of working together, they work opposite each other, and then they create roll. And
Right.
so you kind of mix the two together based on what your so the stick controls are either aileron or elevator. And of course, you can go in diagonals and kind of mix that on the stick. And so what that does is it automatically translates that to movement with the servos for each of those type of controls,
Mm-hmm.
doing what you want with the plane, but it does it with the controls and the computer and the transmitter. It mixes them for you. Is what that's a long way around saying it mixes the two control types to give you what you want from the plane.
I
Sorry.
mean, yeah. Basically, the two servos operate together on both roll and pitch.
Yep.
Is they're joined together. I wouldn't even say they're slave. They're just joined together, and
They mix
the,
together. Yep.
the I won't even say that the receiver does that work. The transmitter controls all that. You know
Yeah.
the
It's a
functions as far as
transmitter.
which one's going to be doing which. But and I imagine every transmitter has its own setup process for that, but just within the menus. Um,
A lot of
yeah,
them
that
do.
yeah, and the key there is to make sure that you've got it set up properly before you ever lift off. You don't want to
Hmm.
give it no up when you're trying to take off and you didn't set your mode right, and all of a sudden you're trying to nose up and it goes straight down into the dirt.
By the way, that's exactly how my first flight went.
Well, I did you on my first flight.
Right? So my first flight, the elevators were backwards. So when
Oof.
I pulled back to have the nose pitch up, it did the opposite. So it turned it into the dirt. So as it's starting to kind of when it's starting to go down, I'm pulling back trying to get the nose back up, only to have it go down into the dirt even more. It,
Right.
yeah, it quickly went downhill from there. But anyway, um,
And all that's part of the learning process. You
Right.
know.
And you and I went through, and you had already checked at home, but we did a final check, and you should do it every time you start to fly. I do it with every one of my planes, and I can't say I get it right every time, but I almost do now. Is it the flight test calls it the high five method, where you're basically whatever surface you want, when you move the stick to that direction, that surface should come up and kind of like you're like high fiving each other. So you go over to the left, the left aileron should come up. When you
Mm,
aileron to the right aileron should come up, and you should basically be high fiving. Elevator, you pull back towards the elevator, and that elevator should come up to give you a high five, right? So that they call it high five method because it's easy to remember. The rudder should follow the direction you're going, but you want to
yeah.
check all that, especially when you're mixing the elevator and aileron. Because I've had
Mm,
a couple times where I had it good, where the elevator worked exactly like it should, but the ailerons were opposite. So if I rolled to the left, it would actually roll to the right, which would be catastrophic if I didn't catch it on the ground.
right. And all that is certainly worthwhile checking while sitting on your bench still. Like
hmm Just
you
make
don't need to.
sure your prop is off. Just please, every time, as much as a pain that might be, take the prop off if you're going to hook up your system on the table.
I think I stressed you doing that
Uh,
because I
uh,
did. I powered my system up multiple times with the prop attached.
hmm
It, I was like, oh, I want to see how strong this motor is holding the power pod in my
Uh,
hand. Every
yeah,
single way, but full throttle. Let's see what it's got. Wow.
I know, and all it takes is for it to slip out of your hand,
Yep.
and
And there's a
or
power pole.
no, or cutting your wrist as the
Yeah.
propeller's spinning, and I had something where it ripped up something I was wearing, and I'm like, oh, thank God it did that, not my skin, you know. There's people who ripped up the back of their hands, or there's a number of people who, I mean, accidents happen. And especially with quadcopters, they got four of them going around. I had a thing going. I was built a sea duck, which is basically a big. It's from Ducktales. It's a big Conair. I think it's L37 or something like that. I'm missing the number, but it's basically a big seaplane. It's got two motors in the front, and so what you want to do is see if you can use the differential propeller speed to create yawing action, which is what a rudder does. So basically, use the props to do all that. Well, I know when I started it, I plugged it in and it started to go, and then it started coming right at me. So I crapped a brick and went, oh God, why did I have propellers on?
Oh,
But I fortunately, knock on wood, haven't cut myself yet with that. But there's been a number of people who have, and the bigger the motor system, the more powerful the motor system, the more dangerous it can be. So, as a safety precaution, if you're checking motor direction, just take the things off.
yeah.
It's that
And
simple.
like you said, you don't have to take the motor off necessarily. Just take the prop off.
Yeah, just undo the prop nut and take the prop off. Test your motor. You can put a little piece of tape on the shaft, and you can basically feel what direction that's hitting from, and then
Mm.
you'll know what direction that's spinning. Okay, so you checked the plane, you gave it a go. What was your experience? How did it go? We checked
Well,
the balance, right? We checked the balance before we went. There's like two little dots or holes on the bottom. If you rest on your fingers, the nose of the plane should be slightly downward, so slightly angled towards the prop when you put your fingers on those dots, right? That's the proper balance for almost any
I
plane.
I think we found that mine was too nose heavy, um, which worked out okay for that day.
Especially that day, yeah.
That day was just rough. I still had fun. The gusts were rough. I watched you fly yours for a while until I was confident and ready to launch mine myself. And I got a couple little flights. What was weird was when the wind was blowing stronger and we did a takeoff, and I had it at say 2/3 throttle, and the thing was just kind of slowly making its way away from us.
Right. It was like
And
the
that's
eagle who's standing at the ridge or flying at the ridge and going nowhere.
right. And of course, that's the distinction between ground speed and airspeed. But
Yep.
uh, and got a little flying with it. Did a couple emergency touchdowns just to keep the wind from tearing it up, and then got going that final time, and something happened. It must have been a
I think it was
gust
a
caught or
gust
something.
and it just
I think
shoved it right on the ground like somebody slapped it.
so. I think a gust caught it right as I was starting a nose down, just to kind
Mhm.
of out again, and that gust just grabbed it. And even though I cut the throttle with the gust cutting across
It didn't
the whole,
matter.
just but it was recoverable. It was salvageable. It just the firewall popped off, the power pod popped out. I think the zip tie I had somewhere in the build popped, but it was
Right.
all recovered. Just
Yeah,
we
the
were
zip
done.
tie you needed to glue back on. You had to just glue the firewall back on it and use fiber tape to attach it so it wouldn't come off the next time. And I mean,
Hmm.
so you learned a couple things about how to strengthen your build, but because the firewall came off, it didn't. I think you still had it. Did you lose your prop? I think you still
No,
had the prop because of that. I think the glue gave before the prop went.
I can't remember if we. I don't think I broke the prop. No, I didn't break the prop that time. I broke the prop here locally when I went
Yes,
flying.
because I
Um,
remember you saying to me, you're like, "Oh, I wish I had just a little bit more time. We could run back to your house, glue the pod back on, and come back out here."
and like all the props and kudos to my wife because she's very patient. That was supposed to be a hey, we're going to go like after lunch on Sunday after D&D. It was like, let's just go grab the stuff, go flying. It's like, babe, we'll be gone an hour
Yeah, it won't be much.
later. She's like, where are you at? And I'm like, all right, let's go because
You're like,
I definitely.
we should go back out.
Yeah, oh man, I could just put a little hot glue on this. We'll get it back up in the air, and that's part of the addiction. Is you know
Right.
the nice thing about it is that it's all cheap enough once you get the core parts. That if something pops, something breaks, you bend the wing, you crack the foam, you break a prop, which always carry an extra prop
Yeah, I always forget that too.
and an extra prop nut.
Right.
So yeah, I ended up building the FT Delta, um, and
And
then got home.
hold on,
Go
before we
ahead.
get too much further, I do want to ask you about that. But what? So after we came back to the car, how are you feeling about the whole thing?
Excited, very very happy. I know you were kind of disappointed in some ways. You were hesitant because Gusty Day didn't get a whole lot of flight time. I think I had a total of 10 seconds air time with that build.
Right,
Just due to,
probably.
but yeah, I finally got the chance to fly because I didn't fly it before I came up. I just didn't have time with the work
Hmm.
schedule. And it was kind of last minute getting that thing built and finished anyway. Um, so yeah, no, I was excited. I was obviously wanting to fly more. Just time wouldn't allow that day.
Yep.
And it solidified that I wanted to keep doing it. If
Right.
you get in the air for 2 or 3 seconds, those 2 or 3 seconds are just super exciting. And then
Yeah,
it
two or
hits the
three
ground
seconds where you were in control of it
until you weren't.
until the wind told you nope.
Yeah. And that's really if it hadn't been windy and gusty, um,
We would have had a blast for a
I,
good half
I think
hour.
flown together.
Hmm.
So
Well, cool. So you went back home, and while you were there too, what were you doing when you came up that weekend? We had the night before had our fun with D&D. You went and did something, and I was like, "What are you doing? What was that?"
you talking about building
Yeah,
something else? Yeah, started on a glider.
you
Because I
did
was
more
going to
than
try.
start on a glider.
Yeah, I was going to try to have that ready to come up and just couldn't manage it. That's what was last minute trying to get ready. That's right.
Yeah, you had the Delta ready like a week before that. This was about a week before Thanksgiving, by the way.
That's
So
right.
You had, I think, did you have the wing finished, or you were
Yeah,
close to?
no, the wing wasn't finished. I had one side of the wing,
Hmm.
um, one side of the airfoil done. Basically, I was trying to build a glider of my own quote unquote design.
Hmm.
Uh, you would give me glider plans, but the plan that didn't print was the FT glider. I think
The FT Simple Soar. It was the model.
that was the one that didn't print. So the one that did come down with the rest of the kit was
A
one
discus
that called
launch glider.
carbon fiber arrow shaft. It was a different type of build that I didn't want to tackle, and I didn't have time to go out and grab an arrow from Walmart and cut it down. So I said, nah, I want to make my own glider. I want a big wing glider. I want one that flies just because it's in the air, very little throttle input needed, and I want to be able to get it up in the air, ride the air currents like I had seen you do to the thermal.
Hmm. Yeah, I
On
remember catching one or two of those before the wing folded.
yeah, and I wanted to do that, and so I started on. I spent a couple nights trying to figure out how to build the actual airfoil itself and figured out a design from some other gliders
Hmm.
plans that but basically the one wing was a full 2 foot by 3 foot, I think
Yeah,
the foam board.
it was massive.
Yeah, 3 foot was one side of the wing.
Right. Yeah, I
And
think it was between 5 and 6 feet long was the wingspan.
oh, did I have the whole thing glued up at that point?
I think we had worked on it, and you had finished the wing, and you were working on how do you make the fuselage so that it will hold a pod, will hold your pod and be long enough with the tail and the rudder. Like you want it longer than just one sheet of foam, and then
Right.
how do you
It
do that? And then how do you make it? How do you guarantee it's going to be big enough and that kind of stuff? So we talked about that, and you had basically started on it, and you were making really good progress. But you're like, dang, I'm never going to get this done. But you had the rudder and the tail on it, and I think you had like pretty much put it together, but you hadn't put the electronics in it.
right. I was still you had given me ideas for how to build the fuselage, and
Hmm.
uh, then I had to figure out because the back of the wing, the back of the airfoil, the top part of the wing came way past the underside of the wing, so I had to
Hmm.
figure out how to the fuselage to mount up underneath of that without the wing being tilted down and causing issues. So yeah, no, it's I think what when I carried that wing in the house and it was 6 foot.
I was kind of beside myself. I'm not gonna lie.
It was 6 foot wing, and you're like, "Good God, Joe!"
Yeah, man, you haven't even flown yet. You don't even. What are you doing?
And I said, honestly, I was going to put a third section on this wing
I
because
know.
I was going to cambered or oh
Dihedral.
crap, yeah, dihedral. I was gonna try for dihedral, possibly polydihedral,
Hmm.
and I just figured it out that quick. So I just set it up with the two and had to figure out the cross bracing between the two wings and box and sleeve within another sleeve and to
Hmm.
get the two together. And yeah, no, I came through your front door. I was like, "Hey Matt, look at my wing."
And I'm like, oh man, this guy's sold. This is great. I'm so excited for you, right? And then I'm
and
like, oh no, like he built something without he built something without even knowing what the heck he's doing. Like, oh no, like I don't want to disappoint him. Let's start looking it over, and I'm like, no, this will work. I mean, the wing is huge. There's a ton of lifting body. So like putting what is it, 4 or 5 layers of foam all sandwiched together as a spar. It's normally that kind of gets heavy. I'm like, but that's not gonna be a big deal for this
no,
wing.
the
It's
wing
really big.
is
It's
huge.
it was like 1.5 times the cord length than a super soar, which is pretty good cord length. I think that's somewhere around like 7 inches or something like that. And what you had was a good like 10 or 11 inches
Yeah.
from the back to the front of the leading edge of the wing. I was like, well, you're probably more than enough. Like this looks great. You did a great job. Kick.
And so that, like we've talked about before, I've got enough of a background in aviation to be dangerous. Um,
And then we flew, and then I'm sitting there flying the simulator. I'm like, hey man, check this out. See if you just so you're not rusty tomorrow. Like, why don't you fly this thing? And I think it was like it was the Delta in uh real flight 7.5 or something. So I gave you the controls, and then you fly it like you've been flying these things for 20 years.
yeah.
And I
Well,
realized, oh,
once I got,
you're we'll be all right.
yeah. Because at that point you're like, oh, he's not blowing smoke about his sim time. He's not had a controller in his hand, but he'll figure it out.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, you'll be fine.
so, and I did finally finish that build. Um,
Right. So when you went home, I remember getting a text somewhere around Thanksgiving.
it was about that time because I know when I flew it, I took my sister with me to spend some time with her. She actually recorded the video of the flight for me. But going back for just a second, what you're talking about with always check your control surfaces and all that, especially if you've got a plane that comes apart in two or more pieces. Because for that one, I had to use servo extenders, the extension wires, to be able to get it all wired up. And
You know, the
one,
servos were about 1.5 to 2 feet out from the center of the fuse. So I mean,
yeah,
most servo leads are about 6 inches. So you definitely needed some
I needed,
big extenders.
yeah. And so when I got out to where I was going to fly, you know, all those two, I had everything else hooked up, ready to go, but I had to plug in the because that build actually had ailerons and then the elevators on the back, and I did have the rudder hooked up and wired up that I didn't end up making use of in the flight, but I had to, of course, hook the servos back in. But before I took off, before I even like wrapped the rubber bands around across the wing and got it all secured, I fired up everything and checked to make sure that I had those control surfaces hooked up correctly. I think I actually had the servos flipped around, so I had to unplug and switch them around.
Hmm.
Um, it's, you gotta go into your controller and change what servo's doing what. And it's quicker just to take the wing back off and disconnect. But um, so yeah, uh, before talking about the maiden flight of that, the FT Delta got a couple more flights out of it before I finally uh, sunk it in a puddle.
Yeah, didn't you say you were flying it in your front yard?
Well, yeah,
You don't
I
have that big of a front yard. I mean, it's not like like some people have acres like in as a front yard. Like you are a normal what like half acre lot or 3/4 acre lot or something.
whole lot's like 3/4 acre, front and back. So, literally, when I got home, I got home that night. I ran in, fired up the hot glue gun, slapped some hot the back on, ran out the front yard. I was like, okay, Rachel's inside doing something. I got a couple minutes. Let me just see if it'll still fly. And it did. Um,
Oh
but it
my
was
god.
nighttime. And I was like, man, there's no wind. Why couldn't it be like this earlier? But
Yeah,
no,
actually, the beginning of the day and the end of the day are great for low wind situations. They're typically really good flying. And in the middle of the day, it's great for soaring, for gliding, because that's when you're going to get the most thermals.
yeah. Um,
I just can't believe he's like, I think I can fly it here. Like, oh man.
like I knew I wasn't going to fly it, like really fly it. I just wanted, like,
You wanted to hover it around a little bit. It's a high alpha plane. It's easy to do.
I had to get my kick. I had to get my hit real quick, and uh, I just needed to see it go.
I know,
I wanted
right?
to hear the motor go. I wanted to hear the wind or feel the wind blow across my hand as I tossed it real quick. It just anyway, so that flew a couple more times. I got it fixed back up, and I was carrying it around the back of the car. And then one day for lunch break, I ran out to the park and flew it. Um, it flew good. That was the day I broke the prop. I took it out another time and ended up nosediving it straight into a puddle.
Oh no.
Uh, oh yeah. Oh, as it dried, it warped. It warped big time. All
Right.
the
So the
foam is.
electronics survived. Nothing caught.
Yeah,
No magic smoke was released. Right.
no, at least I hadn't found any problems yet.
That's good. And you probably
But
won't, honestly, because I don't think the water got to the ESC at all. Your plane took the brunt of it. But as you learned quickly that day, Dollar Tree foam board does not mix well with water, does it?
no, absolutely not. And that was the day I bent the prop because I was actually I picked it up out of the puddle, looked at it, I was like, man, that prop looks bent. I kind of throttled it up a little bit, and the whole plane's wah. So I got back to the car, took the prop off, sat in the front seat, was looking at the prop, saying, "Man, is there any way I'm trying to flex it back into position? Is there any way I can take this home? Can I get home, take the glue gun, kind of put the hot tip against the prop and bend it back? I'm googling how do you no, no,
No, the answer is no. Now you know.
just that prop shot because I could hook it up to another good build and fire it up, and that it's just going to rattle itself out of the air. So. Um, Yeah, so got the glider finished up, and um, this is this is where as I guess I'll call you the mentor. As a mentor in this to me, you have been patient. In that you know that you can steer me for some things, and some things, and you know me well enough. Some things I'm just gonna do,
Oh yeah.
which which is I got this glider built, and by golly, I was going to put it in the air, whether it was fully ready or not. Now, all the electronics were right, but I could not get the center of gravity right. And I had already mounted the wing. I think I had mounted the wing further forward. I had shifted the battery further back, trying to get that tail weight up. As long as that fuselage was no, I was trying to get.
You
I
want to
was
get
it
the
was
nose heavier usually.
forward. So I shifted the wing back, shifted the battery as far forward as I could.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't get rid of all that tail weight, and I ended up flying it like that. I could balance it on my finger, would flip right off, and I said, "Screw it! I've put
Oh no. It
I've,
flipped off the back?
huh?
Like when you
Oh
put it on, it like fell off the back, like the tail it basically fell towards the tail off your fingers?
yeah, absolutely. It was super tail heavy. If
Oh
I
my
tried
god.
under the points where the center of gravity would have been, the tail would drop. It would have flipped out of my hand. That heavy, and I did everything I could short of putting rocks in the nose.
Oh my god. So
To
typically where most wings have their spar is oftentimes usually where the center of lift is on the wing, and that's typically where you want the plane to balance because you want when the plane gets its lift and pulls up that it's not off from the center because otherwise it'll start to rotate the plane. So if you have the lift right where the center of gravity is on the plane, when it lifts, it'll just bring the plane straight up. And which is what most planes do. They get more lift, they go straight up. Otherwise, they're
right,
going to start turning where the nails the motor will start nosing up every time it gets extra lift, and that means that the center of gravity is too far back. Or if it's too far forward, when you get the center lift, it'll start nosing down. And of course, that's sort of the both of them are if you're close, you can usually control it a little bit. And the
yeah,
saying goes, you can fly a tail heavy plane once and a nose heavy plane uh, a bunch of times.
it, yeah,
I did it
and
backwards, but nose heavy plane you'll fly poorly and it'll fly poorly often. If you fly tail heavy, it'll fly poorly, but typically only once.
and that was about the case.
Because what happens
Uh,
is it gets really touchy to the controls, and it's very hard to keep it in control when it's tail heavy.
well, that makes sense, and with it being tail heavy, is always going to want to pitch up a bit, which puts with it being tail heavy, your wing is angled up, which has the underside of your control surfaces catching that much more
Hmm.
force off of your airflow.
Right, which
So
then slows down your plane, which causes it to stall a lot sooner, and that
and
is when it just drops out of the sky.
and you had told me that, and you'd asked me about the progress of the glider because you were like, "Oh my God, he's doing this thing. He shouldn't. I can't believe he's tackling this project." But power to him. Just keep me updated. Let me. How's it going? You should be taking pictures, which I didn't. But
You sent me a couple after the fact. I think you had some you'd taken because I kept telling you like you need to take pictures and get a video of this because it's awesome. Like
yeah,
this is your first attempt at your own plane, kick butt, and I wanted you to update me so that way I could ask you the right questions so that you would have a really good chance at success on that first flight because I was so blown away at what you're doing. I was excited for you. I wanted you to kick ass at this, and you obviously already were. You were doing great. So what happened?
it was tail heavy. I took it out to the field, and I knew it was tail heavy. I knew there was going to be a problem. But by this point, it was a situation of I have put, shoot, I probably put 25 hours into that build. Um, which sounds like an exaggeration, but I spent a lot of time sitting there looking at it, thinking, kind of doing some designs on a scrap piece of paper, figuring out how I was going to stick these two wings together. How was I going to get this to work? How was I going to I was actually doing napkin math on surface area of the wingspan to know how much, did I have enough airfoil span or wingspan, wing surface to get enough lift
Hmm.
to I was going to get the air. And then what I didn't know, and I guess I could have looked up, was is my motor actually going to be powerful enough for this? Which you said it'd be fine, but I got it. I got it out there, and I said it's going to be tail heavy. Matt would be not mad, but Matt would be a little frustrated with me if
I'd
he
just
saw
be
me.
concerned because I've had tail heavy planes that I threw in for the same reason because I've been building this thing and I can't get the CG right and it's frustrating, but it's close and
But I'm
I
gonna.
need to see it in the air. And I threw it in the air and it flew for a moment or two. I got excited and it typically failed ultimately. But
So I I got into here, and as opposed to a launch start, I actually built the landing gear. Um, just so I had wheels so I could take it off
mhm.
smoothly, get it in the grass, which was its own um, it's an interesting factor because it wasn't sidewalk where it was nice and smooth. But I got it up into the air, and yes, as soon as it got enough lift, it went whoop, and it went to lift off, which I had it went to nose up, which I had counteracted that some with trim on the controller.
Yeah, again, if it's
Um,
close, you can shift your elevator so that you can counteract it a bit, so that you can kind of fly it, but it's a hot mess usually.
it was not close. No amount of trim was going to fix that, and I knew it, but I
You,
had to get it
you
in.
did it anyway.
It was one of those things. If I had spent two more evenings working on it, CG would have been right.
Hmm.
I want to fly it now. I
It might have
want to.
been honestly, only one because you knew that it was the balance that was the issue. You're like, I
Mhm.
don't know how to add more weight. I mean, I'm sure if we had talked, I probably could have said, get literally get two rocks
And
and
stick it in the.
glue the things in the nose, and then move your battery accordingly, and then you would have had it.
Yeah. And well,
That's
in
okay.
as in as much as a tail heavy plane does not fly well, it did not fly amazingly. Like it didn't handle amazingly. It flew.
But it flew. I saw you showed me the video.
It flew. The first time I took off, and I didn't get video of the first flight. I don't think. No, I
No, you
didn't get
said you
video.
hadn't. You said this is a video of
This
the second flight, but the first one went pretty well, and I managed to get it back on the ground.
I did,
Which, by the
and
way, hold on, wait. That was my golf clap to you.
the getting it on the ground was more. I got it near the ground and just cut the throttle. I was going to try to dead stick it in, and it just once the throttle was cut, it largely dropped.
Hmm.
Gear absorbed the impact, but popped the zip tie that was holding part of the landing gear on. So I had to
Yeah.
MacGyver bust the. I was going to say MacGyver, but I had zip ties in the box I brought with me. So I brought all my supplies with me, but slapped
Okay.
a new zip, got it back in the air. And again, knew it was going to be problematic, but said, screw it, I'm going to fly it again. And had the video being recorded that time. And that I got about
Yeah, I think
45,
you
one
had your
minute
40
of
minutes.
flight.
No, you
Uh,
4 or 5 minutes.
no, it wasn't that long. It wasn't that long
Oh,
at all.
45 seconds.
45 seconds.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. I think it was a little bit longer than that, but you had your sister
It
filming it, and she did a really good job of keeping it in frame.
did a really good job considering she was zoomed in.
Yeah, I was impressed.
But she recorded, but I got it off the ground and flew. And you're right. The thing you're talking about where it oscillates, where it noses up, you kind of pitch it
It
down.
stall, and then
It stalls, gets airspeed, it pitches up again. Like I was getting into that death cycle, and it was fighting it. It was keeping it largely level, but it would do that a bit, and I'd have to fight the controls to get it. And I flew it over there, and I turned it and brought it back, and I turned it and sent it the other way, and I turned it, and at one point it started rolling weird, and I was able to yank it real hard, nose up, and it pulled itself out of it, and I rolled it level. And then another point, I think a cross breeze caught the wing, and it went to roll it completely over. And I said, you know what? It worked the first time because you're just in that moment. You're all everything you're doing is snap reactions, trying to
right.
keep the thing. And it was upside down, like 50 feet in the air, and I pulled back on that stick trying to get it to nose up, which
Is nosing
relative
down.
to down, but I was going to try to pull out of it. And you saw in the video, it only did half that turn because it just
Yeah.
went full force, nose first into the ground. You could hear it hit. You saw the pieces fly.
Oh, man. I've seen that scene many a time from my own creation, so I knew it well. And I was like, oh, poor Joe. But he had fun. I could tell. I'm like, "Hey, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. He could have destroyed the whole thing. I mean, everything. And you would have been like, I'm in.
Well, and
Which you already
here's
were.
here's the sad part, and I don't know if you know it yet. You say, yeah, you could repair it, you could do that. I mean, the fuselage was shot, the wings were gummed up or like boogered up, so that whole build, I ripped the electronics out. That whole build went in the trash, which is sad because there's so many hours that went into it.
Yeah, but
Um,
you learned so much from that. And you gained a
and
lot of confidence in your building ability. Like you learned a lot about how to balance it on just out of nothing. Just kind of like, it should be about here. That's
yeah,
immeasurable. It took me a year to figure that crap out.
and you know, the nice thing about this hobby, looping back to part of the opening conversation, is yeah, sure, I chucked 25 hours of time that I put into it, which is kind of sad. Like I would have loved to have hung that in here, but it didn't
Hmm.
fly, crashed. But as many hours as got dumped into it, any hobby is going to have a lot of time. What I lost monetary wise in that plane, $5.
Right.
I think that like
Yeah,
total there
because
was
it
like
was a
five.
large build. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, it was because it was a large build. It was $5.
Yeah, like it was a big build. It took, but it had a lot of like each wing was a whole board, but I wasn't
Hmm.
like pulling pieces and 3/4 pieces. Like so, but no, $5. I think I was out for that build
Right.
plus a. I think that prop might have broke too, but is what it is. Um,
So
now,
you were out under $10. You had an amazing experience. It
and
confirmed that yes, I really enjoy this hobby. I can't wait to get deeper. And obviously we had an experience. You got to share it with me. By the way, thank you so much. That was awesome. I didn't expect that. You just kind of mentioned it was mostly done. I'm like, "Dude, you need to start sharing stuff with me." And so you passed it along, and man, that made my day. That was awesome.
so I know that was like the two well, those are the only two builds I got. I don't have
Well,
anything on the bench right now just because of holiday time and
oh yeah,
work. I want to get into it, but we have been going for a while. We
yeah,
probably want to go and start getting into these other topics you wanted to hit real quick
yep,
before we have to call this episode done.
right, exactly. So, well, one of the things, the whole point of this is kind of to talk about what what does it take to get in. How do you get started in this thing, right? You got started by talking to me. You saw me getting deeper into this hobby, and by deeper, we're talking, it starts getting up to my eyeballs. Um, but you see, how do you get in, right? You saw I used flight test to get in. Other people saw their parents, usually their dad, would be building balsa planes in the basement. And so they go to the local hobby store and say, "Hey, what do I need to get started?" So that's one way to do it. You can always figure out where your local club is, because there's one, your RC modeling club. Go to your local hobby store, ask them where it is, and they'll point you in the right direction, and they'll get you hooked up with those guys. And oftentimes, most clubs, you go out to their field, check it out, talk to the guys, see if you get a good vibe. There's probably one in the other direction if you don't like the one you just were at. And almost all of them have like a beginners program where they've got a club plane that's a beginner plane. They've got two transmitters that they will have, a mentor to help you get into the hobby and really enjoy it. Um, I ended up jumping in kind of like you. I'll be darned if I wait for anybody to get me into this hobby. I'm going to start on my own, right? And so, I tracked down my path before I even had a chance of going out to a club. I eventually found one and talked to the guys and stuff like that. And I probably should have went through their mentoring program, but I was a stubborn guy, so I did anyway. You can also go. There's a club called rcgroups.com, and it's all there's those two, the flighttest.com and rcgroups.com. They are just chock full of people in this aviation RC hobby, and everybody there is just, they love it. They're excited about it, and they love to share what they're working on and what they're doing. If you have any questions, they'll answer it. Now, with RC groups, I recommend you look online first to see if there's a simple answer, because if it's there and you didn't look, then they'll call you out on it. Flight test, they're ready for noobs. That's their whole thing is designed for that. So almost everybody there will give you a friendly answer. They'll say, "Hey, Google told me this was, this is what it is." So they'll give you the answer, and they'll say, "Go ahead and look. You might find it there too, but come here and ask, because we'll be there." Anyway, so those are some basic places to go. Talk to your friends, go to a local club, go to your local hobby store, ask them questions, how to get started. Look on the internet. I mean, YouTube videos, there are people all like Joe and I, who are posting. Joe doesn't post his videos yet, but I imagine he might. I might demand it just because I want to see it too. But when I fly something, I've got maybe 10 people who look at it. It doesn't matter. But I post what I put online, and I share it with the group, on flight test and RC groups where it's appropriate. And those guys look at it and they go, "Oh, great job," or "It looks like," and they'll help you diagnose what went wrong with your plane, because you're like, "What? Why doesn't this work for me? Like, I thought I had everything set." They're like, "Yeah, see, this is what happened. See, right at minute 105."
Mm-hmm.
The battery must have shifted because it was flying well, and then it started getting squirrely, looked very tail heavy. When you did that sharp pull, the battery might have loosened. How tight was that? You know,
Right.
and so they'll give you helpful advice. Um, and there are a lot of tools online that you can go to and look up on when you're doing your designs like you had, that you can calculate the wing area, you can calculate the lift, you can figure out how much your stuff weighs and have an idea as to what kind of performance you're going to expect out of that, or figure out what kind of motor size you need. And we'll get into that some other time. But those are ways you can get started. I got started by looking at flighttest.com, looking at their YouTube site, and they have a whole beginner series, and they have a whole probably about 3 dozen to 4 dozen planes, ranging from very simple, easy beginner planes. And the Delta is as simple as folding a piece of foam in on itself and putting a
Mm-hmm.
couple fins on it. I mean, it's that simple, right? To something really complex, like right now they're putting together Master Series where you're molding foam into cone shapes, linking them all together around a core, and creating a very realistic looking model of famous planes like the P-38 Lightning, the Corsair, which is the famous gull wing naval plane, the Mustang, and why am I blanking on the other one? It'll come to me. It's the elliptical wing plane that everybody else. If you like the Mustang, you also like the other one, and I can't. It's one of my favorites, but I can't think of it right now. Go there, figure it out. They're there to help you. They want you in. So do we.
Okay. Well, in the process of closing the episode, I've already said that I don't currently have anything on my bench, but I would like to. I think I want to rebuild the FT Delta, and I'll probably take a crack at the old fogey up next. Matthew, what do you currently have on your bench or plan on working on next?
Well, if you said you're going to start on the old fogey, then I'm now putting that on my bench. Um, as full as my bench is. So I have a plane that I've been building that's something off of our real flight, and it's called the Sky Terror. And it looks like one of those foam glider planes you get from the hobby store. And it's got two ducted fans on it, and they have the ducts will tilt down, and it'll be a vertical takeoff plane, and then they
Hmm.
tilt back forward, and it shoots off like a rocket. And I'm excited to see if I can get that to work. I imagine it's going to be an amazing flying plane, no matter which way I shake it. So I'm looking forward to that one. I've started that one. That's kind of like separate from the balsa builds. The balsa builds, I've got the Remington Brunelli 2, which is looks like a flying camper. It's a bi-wing. I've got the uh, Burgess Dunn BD8, which is basically the tailless flying wing. Been a success. I've got the Mara, the Wind Freak. Those are planker planes. Um, they're balsa kits that I've turned into foam board planes that are relatively easy to put together. So I'm working on those. I also have a model of the Spruce Goose, the Lincoln. I'm blanking on the full name of it, but that's an older bi-wing that a friend of mine's grandpa flew with Churchill. No, not Churchill. Yeah, it's like Churchill's brother. And why am I blanking on his name too? Anyway, I don't have it on the list. So, but the Spruce Goose, like I said, um, and I've also got about 3 or 4 other ones that I've been working on. So, I've been basically taking these 3 view plans, turn them into cutout sheet plans like Flight Test has, with all the patterning and
Mm-hmm.
the partial cut, full cut. And I'm using an ironing technique to kind of get a more airfoil, more aerodynamic shape. Um, and a Minimoa, which is basically a glider plane, about 40 inch wingspan, and then a really tiny version, very tiny lightweight version using microcontrols. I call that the skinny MOA because it's using a much lighter technique, something very different. Yeah, so I got all those
So,
on my build table.
so suffice to say, you've got a lot of open end projects right now.
I do. Those are all started. Well, about most of them were started about 2 months ago.
Hmm.
I was very inspired. Okay.
We'll have to keep everybody updated on those projects as we move forward.
Yeah,
But
a lot of those are very near their end, so I'm looking forward to hopefully reporting that most of them have given a shot flying in the sky.
well, we'll have to see how that goes. To find out, people have to tune in and keep listening, and they can hear progress reports on all that. But I think at this point, we need to call this episode to a close. Thank
Sounds
you,
like a good
everybody,
plan.
tuning in. Matthew, final words?
Keep flying. Get out there. Give it a try. What's the worst that could happen? You lose what? $5, was it?
Yeah, about. All right. We'll catch you guys next time.
Bye, everybody.